Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jeremy. I work on the K-12 team with Faith here in the Government and Community Relations Office. And I'm going to be presenting today, talking a little bit about accessibility and kind of coming at it from the perspective of someone who really has just been learning about this through kind of personal interest over the last couple years. Because I think that is often an interesting and valuable viewpoint for other people who may not necessarily have a disability or be the target audience for accessibility, but may produce content or just share things on the web or participate in Zoom calls in a way that means that you have some ability to improve accessibility in your own work. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I think we've already waited a couple minutes, and it looks like we're close to the number of participants who we were expecting. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to take it away and start screen sharing here. Just give me just a moment. Okay. Let's see. I can't see the participants right now, so could someone pipe up and just tell me if y'all can see my
It looks great, Jeremy.
Great. Awesome. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be presenting today on digital accessibility and some of the concept of universal design and how to just kind of design your work to make sure that it is usable by the maximum number of people. So accessibility broadly is the field and the practices and the technologies that make it easier for really anyone to navigate things on their own terms. And it specifically, usually applies to people with disabilities. But as I'm going to be talking about a little bit today, I think accessibility at its best really applies to everyone, because I think even people who don't consider themselves as having a disability find themselves in situations or have external circumstances in which measures for accessibility often end up being really useful to them. Part, I think, of the philosophy of accessibility and bringing accessibility into your work is kind of embodied by this shift that some of you may or may not have seen in like how disabilities and handicapped people are kind of depicted. That is, I think, encapsulated well in this cool logo that has been kind of redesigned from the original, the old style handicapped logo to this new kind of more active, more engaged and having of agency logo. And I think it speaks to this kind of idea that in the modern world, there's really no reason why anyone, regardless of their disability status, shouldn't be able to engage with things on their own terms and as fully as anyone else. And so I think building whatever you do, whether it's your emails, whether it's your Zoom meetings, for the largest possible range of participants is not only right, but I think it's just it makes your work better. So to start this off, I'm going to actually dive back a little ways, because Berkeley, the city of Berkeley, has a really interesting history with accessibility as the site of one of the real kind of revolutions in accessibility history that happened right here in the 70s. And to talk about that and and the idea of universal design that it helped spawn, I'm going to share a project that I made last year, kind of in coordination with the All Access ERG at Berkeley Lab, which is the employee group kind of dedicated to accessibility and advancing that cause and those practices, as well as the Molecular Foundry where I was working at the time. So I'm going to, this is made a little more difficult by some difficulties we're having screen share, but give me just a moment because I need to switch windows. This is an infographic I made last year, on the anniversary of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, to encapsulate both some of the history there, but also the idea of universal design that kind of was helped spawned by some of the historical developments here in Berkeley. So starting in the early 1970s, there was a group of students at UC Berkeley who were among the first very heavily handicapped students to be admitted into colleges and kind of start fighting for their right to not just kind of be outcast and dismissed as irrelevant and needing of care for the rest of their lives, which I think was really the status of a lot of people with disabilities at that time. And part of the big push that they were able to implement was for curb cuts, which you may know as handicapped ramps or just sidewalk ramps. You can see kind of a little graphic depiction of them over on the side here. And the first intentionally planned city implemented curb cuts anywhere in the United States were implemented here in Berkeley, California. And although they did a lot to help improve the accessibility and improve the ability of students in wheelchairs to navigate the built environment, a really interesting thing started happening once they became commonplace, which is that people of all kinds started using them for uses that were much different than their kind of original intended use. It's since been observed and thoroughly documented that bicyclists, that movers, people with babies, even just completely unencumbered pedestrians will go out of their way to use curb cuts because they obviously serve a wide range of uses. So this was kind of a happy accident that came out of this, adapting this one measure for accessibility. And in the world since, it has kind of become known as the curb cut effect. It is basically this idea that accommodations for some often have wide-ranging benefits for a much larger group of people. So the curb cut effect occurs largely because one solution can often address many kinds of barriers. So there's an interesting way to think about disability, which is that there are multiple reasons why someone might not have the ability to do something. There are, your kind of classic permanent disabilities. You could think of somebody who maybe doesn't have an arm, but you could also have a temporary disability. So somebody who has a broken arm or a broken wrist and can't use that arm, just for the moment. There's also situational disabilities, which encompass people who are holding things, people who are in, some kind of situation where they just can't use that arm. And as a result, all three of these people can benefit from the same technology that's kind of ostensibly designed just for a person with a permanent disability. So interestingly, this curb cut effect applies to the digital world as well. And accessibility, in the digital age has gone from being predominantly about, do you have handicap ramps? Do you have, accessible doorways? Do you have elevators? To very much encompassing, the digital world where we spend so much of our time and do so much of our work, do so much of our learning. So an example of a digital curb cut is something like closed captions. Very similarly, they were originally designed, closed captions being subtitles that not only describe, the spoken words in a movie or, in a Zoom call as they're enacted today, but ideally also describe the actions, the music, anything that you would hear on screen that a hearing user would be able to understand. Those were originally designed for deaf and hard of hearing people, but they've since been used really heavily by a wide range of people that aren't deaf or hard of hearing. So you have people who are in a noisy environment or a really quiet environment who don't have headphones, people who don't speak English natively and either are using it to help them understand the English dialect, or using the fact that you have now a text record of what's being said that you can run through a translation software. You have neurodivergent people. A lot of people with autism, a lot of people with ADHD find it much easier to pay attention and to absorb information from a video if it has closed captions. So this is kind of an example of how this curb cut effect applies very much in the digital realm as well. So with that, I want to kind of spend the rest of the presentation today talking a little bit about some of the kinds of disability and some of the tools that exist for addressing those, and hopefully actually showing you guys a little bit more of a hands-on kind of firsthand view of how those tools work. Because for me, the process of just like trying some of these assistive technologies out was a huge part of what made it what made it much more interesting and much more easy to kind of, put myself in this mindset and make accessibility practices a big part of what I do. So I have to switch back to the other presentation mode again. Okay, so we talked a little bit about kind of the history here. The types of disability that, ideally accessibility measures account for in the digital space broadly fall into 4 buckets. There's visual disabilities, auditory, motor, which just encompasses like any inability to move or kind of interact with things physically, and then cognitive, which is arguably the largest and kind of most fuzzy bin, which includes anything from diseases, muscular dystrophy, of lots of, any problem that impairs your ability to either see or perceive or otherwise understand content, all the way through just ADD, autism, dyslexia, things that impair your ability to read. And then, as I was kind of talking about in the infographic, there's different states in which these disabilities can kind of come into play. So a permanent example of visual disability is somebody who's blind and has been blind since birth. A temporary example might be somebody who has cataracts, and a situational example might be somebody who's just driving or, like, for whatever reason can't look at their technology. So I've kind of created a little informal table here, if you're curious, just for some more examples of why, what situations or what kind of states people might fall into these bins. But the takeaway is really that in some way or another, in some situation or another, most of us have experiences of being disabled in one of these categories in our everyday lives, which means that accessibility measures that kind of counteract these or take them into account are useful to almost everybody and almost all of us, regardless of whether or not we kind of consider ourselves as having a disability. So this is really the end point here, is that accessible design is good design, and that, at the end of the day, if what you're doing has these kind of broad buckets of disability in mind, then odds are really good that it's going to just be relevant and be useful for a much larger group of people. So today I want to talk a little bit about some of the technologies that exist for addressing these disabilities. The first one that I think is most interesting to me, and one of the first ones that I kind of started experimenting with, and the one I'm going to demonstrate for you today, is screen readers, which is an assistive technology that basically scans whatever content is presented on a screen and reads it out loud. In the case of text, this is obviously pretty easy. It's much like an audiobook, or like Siri or whatever can read text out loud. But as you might guess, in the case of things that are purely depicted visually, it's often a lot harder. And that's where something called alternative text comes in, which is basically a text description of visual information. So we'll be going over that a little bit later, but that's screen readers. For people with auditory disabilities, the main tool at our disposal is closed captions, which is kind of almost the inverse of a screen reader. It's taking, or it's very much the auditory version of a screen reader, or it's taking auditory information and depicting it again as text, which you can either read or otherwise engage with. And then for motor impairments, and interestingly, this is also very relevant for visual impairments, the main technologies are switch control, or the ability to navigate and use your computer fully from the keyboard. So this makes a lot of sense if you think about it, both for people who are visually impaired and for people who are motor impaired. Using a mouse is very difficult in a lot of these situations, or impossible. And so having the ability to navigate technology purely by clicking, for example, the tab key, or by clicking a series of buttons on your keyboard helps solve for both of those problems. And I'll show you a little bit in our screen reader demo what that actually looks like on the back end. And finally, for cognitive disabilities, because this is kind of the largest, most fuzzy category, it often has kind of broad strokes approaches to fixing it. So a lot of the ways that cognitive disabilities are addressed and made accessible is just through good design, and that encompasses things like just using high contrast, good text size, making sure that there's like a really linear, logical progression of information in your work. And so I'll go over a few examples of that later. But for now, I wanted to just show you all how some of these assistive technologies can be accessed and used and experimented with, regardless of whether you have a disability. So I don't know, you all may or may not already know about this based on your disability status or just how curious you are about the settings of your computer, but at least on a Mac, most of the accessibility tools that are built into these machines, which at this point is actually a pretty amazing expansive array, can be found under your system preferences with under this little logo that says accessibility. So when you click this, there's not only a walkthrough that will kind of take you through all of the things, but you can see all of these tools. You can kind of explore them on your own time. The two that I'm interested in showing you today are Voiceover and Zoom. Zoom is pretty simple. It basically just allows people who are vision impaired to zoom in on parts of their screen. So it's just kind of something to keep in mind, is that you often want to build your content in a way that if somebody's zooming in, they won't just like totally lose the context or get really confused. But Voiceover is by far the more complicated of the two. So I'm going to show you guys today, and hopefully this works well with our screen sharing. I'm going to show you today how to enable this and just what it looks like. And as kind of a disclaimer, I am not very good at using Voiceover. I think users who are blind, this is the main way that they engage with their phone, the main way they engage with their computers. And as a result, they are extremely good at using it. But I think it's really informative, even clumsy as I am with using it. I think it's really informative and really interesting to kind of understand how somebody who's blind or somebody who has really low vision interacts with technology. And I think it was a big part in helping me understand how what I needed to do in order to make the work that I put out in the world accessible. So hopefully you all will be hearing the same audio that's coming into my ears. I think I set that setting up correctly. Somebody let me know if you don't. But when I click this, it will basically activate a tool that is set to describe and read everything that it's seeing on the screen.
Voiceover on system preferences, accessibility window, accessibility features table, Chrome, Zoom.us, lit transcription, the Candle Chrome, Berkeley Lab K-12 program on Twitter. Today, join us at 3 p.m. PT. More, menu pop-up collapsed button. Berkeley Lab K-12 program. Okay. More, menu pop-up collapsed button. You are currently on a button. To display a list of options, press Control Option Space.
All right, sorry, a little bit chaotic there. Did everyone hear that?
System preferences, Google Chrome.
Yes.
Can't. Awesome. So, as you can tell, Voiceover has a lot to handle. It is basically trying to track everything that everything you have as an option on the screen. So it can be a little interesting to use it as a sighted user who is still using your mouse. But the kind of key navigational technique here is that by pressing tab or really the arrow keys on your keyboard, I can navigate around my screen and have Voiceover read out to me like all of the options, all of the things that it encounters. So today I just wanted to show you as an example what it looks like to navigate Twitter with Voiceover. So in a moment, I'm going to start kind of going through, I'm going to start advancing the cursor, which right now is over here. It's on the just like 3-dot menu in the corner. And I'm going to start advancing it through the screen and to have it land on first the text of the tweet, then some of the links, and then the actual graphic, the visual information on the tweet, which again, as a sighted or as a blind user, you wouldn't be able to see. So I'll just do that. It'll take a moment, and bear with me as if I overshoot at all or get lost, because as I said, I'm a little clumsy on using Voiceover stuff.
Today, join us at 3 p.m. PT for After School Science Hour, where we'll hear from you. Visited link at Oshirmo 100 about his work on avoiding internet traffic jams when delivering news of an oncoming earthquake. Downwards pointing arrow image link bit.ly/blast h. Visited link at Berkeley. Visited link at LBNLCs. GIF ALT, group, graphic for April 20th after school science hour at 3 p.m. Point. Images show a satellite over the Earth's surface with network traffic moving around as blue lines. Text reads, this month, the scientific internet. Learn how the internet works. See how scientists tackle internet traffic jams. To warn about earthquakes. Materials and registration. bit.ly/blast_h, empty group. You are currently in an empty group. Voiceover off.
Awesome. So that is all I wanted to show you. And there's a few things that I just want to point out within that. So as you navigate, a screen or a text with VoiceOver, there's a lot of things that are kind of counterintuitive or that you wouldn't necessarily expect. First of all, that it engages with links by just kind of saying link and then reading out the text of that link. So as I'll get to a little bit later, that's one reason why it's really helpful when you're designing something for people using VoiceOver or people using screen readers, designing them with descriptive links. So rather than just saying, click here, saying what it is your link is taking them to. Another thing that I thought was really interesting is that as you advance down, things like acronyms, I don't know if you all caught this, but as it read out this acronym, which for us stands for Berkeley Lab After School Science Hour, it pronounced it as BLAST-H. So I think VoiceOver and a lot of assistive technologies do their best to navigate the text environment in the most kind of, most intuitive, most understandable way. But one thing that I've really experienced a lot as I experiment with VoiceOver is that it makes things like acronyms that might be really clear to a sighted user kind of confusing. And I think often VoiceOver users are experienced enough using this world or using this tool and navigating this world that it's not that confusing for them. But it's one of the many things that I think is really interesting in experimenting with it, is that you can start to identify things in your work and what you do that are weird like that. As we advanced to actually looking at, having the VoiceOver cursor on top of our graphic here, there was a few things I wanted people to notice. The first is that it was basically going through and reading off, it was describing, first of all, it said image shows a satellite over the Earth's surface with network traffic bouncing around. It doesn't know any of that intention or, inherently. All of that is coming off of this attribute on the image called alt text. So if I click this button as a sighted user, all of that text is right here. And this is something that I had to enter as the person who created this graphic and posted this tweet. This is something I had to enter myself. So this is the other thing that we're going to be talking about today, is how you design this alt text to be as effective as possible, because your goal with alt text is to capture all of the relevant information that a sighted user would see. So you can see here, I tried to just describe the image. I tried to describe all of the text. There were some interesting things I only noticed, upon doing this demo, which is that, like, for example, I wrote it out as like 3 p.m. PT period, and VoiceOver pronounced that as 3 p.m. point, because PT period, often signifies point. So lots of interesting things there. I think my main takeaway from using VoiceOver myself is it's really hard to get it perfectly right every time. But yeah, I hope that was just an interesting demo. And like I said, you can access that yourself and play with it. And I really highly encourage people to explore just like what it's like to use that tool and try it out on your own websites, your own tweets, your own emails, whatever it is, just so that you have a sense for what it would be like to navigate that space as a blind person. So now I have to go through this whole pooper of trying to return to my original presentation deck. So
hey, Jeremy, this is Kelly. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just a quick ad here. There's a social media digital accessibility course that I'm going to send to the task force that I've already taken, but in it, awesome. They address screen readers and how if you are using a hashtag that is more than one word and you do not have the first letter of each word capitalized, the reader will read it as one word. So you may have noticed even on Instagram, we've started, because Instagram frowns on anything that's capitalized in a hashtag. We've started capitalizing the first letters so that to make our content a little more accessible. But stay tuned, we'll have a social media course for that as well.
That's really cool. No, thank you. That's an awesome plug. And yeah, I mean, just another example of things that I think are not necessarily intuitive or or widely known for sighted users that are all really, I think you can learn a ton from demos, and you can also learn a ton from just trying to navigate that space yourself. So how to use alt text. This, like I said, is really the main tool that users, or I guess content producers, anyone who's really making anything online, can use to help facilitate, how a screen reader navigates a largely visual environment. Alt text at its most basic, is just an attribute in the HTML coding of how something is displayed on the web. You can kind of see it here. It's literally just alt equals whatever the actual description is. But most photo sharing platforms, whether they're Instagram or Twitter or even Google Sites, as I'll show you guys in a little bit, have the option to enter it. So it's usually just a menu item. It's a button you can press. So it's worth, if you're interested in doing this, it's worth just going through those platforms and figuring out where it is you enter alt text if you're interested. And there's a couple kind of guidelines for how to use alt text effectively. First of all, you don't necessarily need to add it to purely decorative images, although it's great to kind of give a blind user, as much of the experience of, seeing or navigating, a beautifully designed thing as possible. Just adding alt text to purely decorative images, that is anything that really doesn't serve an information carrying role, is often really distracting. It just provides more things that voiceover cursor can land on, and things that can just detract from the kind of the core actually important information. Another just kind of tip is that you really want to pay special attention to text. Anything that is text that is only displayed in an image, which is not, I guess you can think of it as not highlightable. Anything that isn't highlightable isn't going to be picked up by a screen reader. So that's why, for example, that graphic that I showed you all on Twitter, where there was text in the graphic that wasn't, obviously wasn't highlightable, all of that text needed to be captured in the alt text. Otherwise, a screen reader was never gonna, never gonna pick it up, never gonna encounter it, and a blind user was never gonna get that information. So the kind of rule of thumb that I've written out over here is just that you are trying to describe the key visual information that a sighted person would get from an image. I wanted to show you all, if I had known it was going to be so difficult to balance the screen share, I would have picked fewer bouncing back and forth between sharing and not sharing. But let me show you really quickly. I just wanted to share another example of where you actually find that alt text attribute. I was going to show you on our Google site for just the K-12 group team. So, all right. So this is just the back end of our K-12 website. And if you click on any of the images and you go to the three-dot menu, there's an option that says add alt text. Very similarly, if I was to start writing a new tweet and I added an image, there would be a three-dot menu that would say add alt text. So just wanted to kind of give you those examples of where you can usually find this setting. If you go, I wanted to have a Sprout Social window open as well, but basically, it is widely, it's a wide enough used standard now, and it's actually a legally enforced standard in many places, that you have alt text on important images, that almost every image sharing platform has this ability. So even if you've never done it, it's almost always an option, and I would highly encourage you guys to just explore the image sharing platforms that you use and figure out how to add that. So that is the main thing that I wanted to demonstrate to you here today. But I also wanted to just point you all towards another resource that I found extremely useful, which is this set of posters, which hopefully Faith will be sharing a link to in the chat. But this is a resource that was shared with me through the All Access ERG. Again, really useful kind of group of employees working on accessibility at the lab. But it just has really simple do's and don'ts for a wide range of the disabilities and the kind of use cases that you want to practice for. So I feel like I come back to this, every couple of months because I'm sharing it out with someone or because I'm working on something, and I feel like I learn something every single time. But I would highly encourage you all to just go through this, learn a little bit about, some of the best practices. But one thing I wanted to emphasize is that a lot of these practices actually overlap with each other. So you'll see that, for example, here on accessibility practices for designing for users on the autistic spectrum, one of the things is to make buttons descriptive, make links descriptive, so that people don't need to guess or work purely on context for figuring out where a button goes or where a link goes. You'll also find that exact same guidance down here on designing for people with low vision. It's likewise, if a screen reader encounters a link or encounters a button, it will read that text. And so if the link isn't descriptive, it's going to be much harder for that user to know where they're going. It's also advice for people with dyslexia and for anxiety. So broadly, I think, I just wanted everyone to kind of come away with the impression or the understanding that when it comes to design like this, you can often kill multiple birds with one stone. Can you all see the presentation right now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, this basically just that best practices in accessibility work together really well. That doing things like having clear linear layout is relevant to almost every disability. Doing things like having clear, simple language is relevant to both people who have hearing disabilities and cognitive disabilities. And avoiding page timeouts is another thing that's really useful for people with motor disabilities as well as people with cognitive disabilities. So I'll let you all explore those posters. I learned a lot from them, but I think they can help you kind of get a handle on a few of the really widely applicable practices. And I made an effort here to just kind of hammer down the few things that apply to almost every situation. Okay, so alt text, and I think just broadly making sure that you're not sharing information in purely visual ways. I think that can encompass a lot of different things, whether it's just using colors for a key rather than text, on like a graph or a chart. It can include, whether images have actual information that they're conveying versus just being decorative. I think there's, just broadly, you want to just make sure, like, if a sighted user is taking away something from this that a blind user wouldn't, you want to figure out a way to include that information either in the text, the body text, or in alt text. Captions are really easy to add to Zoom calls like this one, as well as to any like YouTube video that you post, any videos you post on social media. It can be time intensive, but like I said, I think it really adds a lot of utility to people who are viewing those in a noisy environment, who are neurodivergent in some way and benefit from just having that extra kind of way to absorb information. And on Zoom calls, it's super easy. You just hit that CC button in the toolbar and it auto-generates captions. And I know that for a lot of people, both hard of hearing and ADD, or just in a difficult environment, that is a really important asset. So I encourage all of you to use the closed captions function on Zoom. And for design, I think the biggest factor is just keeping things clear, keeping them linear, making sure that your designs aren't really overcrowded or really hard to navigate. And that ends up benefiting both people who are neurodivergent, have cognitive disability, and who could get easily overwhelmed, but also people who are using something like screen reader and are navigating through your page bit by bit, because the more complicated and the more kind of arranged your content is, the more difficult that becomes. And finally, I just want to point you all, and I'll share a link to these slides, but it's not letting me advance. Here we go. Want to point you all to just a few more resources that can hopefully be helpful. There's first and foremost the Berkeley Lab All Access ERG, which is an awesome community of people, both disabled and not disabled, who think about this stuff all the time, and have just been they're a great just group for advocating for these changes at the lab and beyond, as well as for just kind of teaching people and supporting each other. So a big fan of their work. Here is also linked that universal design infographic if you ever want to come back to it or share it with anyone. And coming up, I just got shared through the All Access ERG, is an assistive technologies webinar that UC is hosting in kind of celebration of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And it's going to cover a lot of today's topics and more in depth, from how screen readers work and how to create alt text to, I think, some of the other things that people use. So highly recommend that, either if you've been to this or if you know somebody who could have benefited from coming to this and could use a similar thing. And then these two things that I like right down here are those best practices posters that I think are just really elegant and straightforward. And there's also a really much more comprehensive website that Microsoft created, all about using accessibility and just like the tools, the exercises you can go through to kind of find your blind spots, find organizational blind spots. And I think, yeah, broadly, I would just open myself up to anyone who is interested in reaching out and learning more. As I kind of said at the very beginning of this, I am very much coming to this work from a position of somebody who doesn't really consider myself to have a major disability, but I have learned a lot from just engaging with this. And I think it's super interesting in large part because of that idea of universal design and the fact that, if you can design well for accessibility, it generally means that your design is just good. So, whether or not you're a designer on, like a professional sense, or just somebody who tweets, somebody who writes emails, somebody who, puts out YouTube videos or, handles Zoom meetings, I think everybody in this day and age is responsible for producing some kind of digital content, and being aware of these measures is a huge step towards making sure that is useful to everyone. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to hit me, but that is the end of the presentation content.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hey.
Hi, I'm Erica. I'm in a communications role in IT division. I really appreciate your presentation. It was super informative, and I really like the demos that you did of the screen reader and like how to add alt text, because I think a lot of the communication staff at the lab are probably familiar with those processes, but we also have like administrators and other operations roles performing those kind of tasks, and it really helps to see those demos. So
yeah,
apologies if this is already discussed, but I'm just wondering, like, what are ways we can integrate your presentation and these best practices into like the current processes at the lab, like onboarding or even integration with the ergonomics program? Like, I haven't done an ergo evaluation in a while, but I think it will be really helpful if the ergo advocates even ask about accessibility concerns or like have a checklist.
Totally.
For
yeah,
best practices. Yeah. And
I honestly, I would welcome ideas about that from any of you. I think if I hopefully, let's see if it was already entered in the chat. Yeah, so Faith just sent a link to this presentation, like the kind of viewing link. Anyone is more than welcome to use it, to share it in whatever capacity. And please let me know if there's ever anything like you come across where you're like, oh, if these two slides could have more elaboration. I'm more than happy to do that, to like make this presentation, a tool in and of itself. But I think, I guess my answer to your question for my own part is like, I think just having those conversations, especially if you have examples you can lead with, is super helpful. I think like, all it took was one person. In this case, it's my partner who worked in accessibility at Apple, is who I learned a lot of this from. She was at one point able to just walk me through like, this is how you write a good good alt text, and like just having someone tell me like what the right level of information is was super helpful, because I knew of it, but I had no idea like, do you just describe the absolute bare minimum? Do you like go super in depth into really like poetic descriptions of everything you can see? So I think just doing that baseline of like giving examples, like just helping normalize it, talking about it, is really helpful, I think, towards just integrating it into workflows. But the wishy-washy part of my answer is that like I would love suggestions or feedback from any of you. If you see a use case or you see a way that this can be implemented at the lab that I can help with, I'm more than happy to help.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see a lot of possibilities within IT because I don't think it's, a huge priority for our division at the moment, even though we manage design and, operate a lot of the core systems that staff need to access, and they're just not very responsive and, viewer friendly for a lot of us, I think. And I also don't have any disabilities, but I like having large text to not strain my eyes and all that.
Totally.
And I don't know if you've already done this, but we have a lab communications council where I think a presentation like this could be super helpful. And IT Creative Services is creating this visual communications group where this presentation could be helpful.
Cool.
But we are publishing a monthly newsletter, so I'm definitely going to include a link to your slide deck. And the other idea I had, I'm sorry, I'm taking up a lot of time here for questions, but the other idea I had was for events and meetings. We have a conference services division. So I'm just wondering if like incorporating your best practices, maybe just like a top 10 checklist for things to consider for events and meetings and accessibility. Because as much as I like the posters and the slides, I often, I just don't refer to these type of resources very often. Yeah, so so that's it.
Very cool. Yeah, of course. Yeah, Janie.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is really a helpful presentation and a good discussion for us. A couple of things. I was doing a presentation to a group of federal agencies, and I had to submit my slides in advance, and they let me know that these were not accessible, and I had to redo all the whole slides. And it really helped me understand how much I was lagging in my responsibilities. So that was quite a wake-up call. And so searching for PowerPoint guidelines on how to enhance each slide was really key. And if there's a repository of how to do that, this would be something really helpful. Because the second part of this kind of piggybacks on what Erica was just talking about. I think aren't we violating some federal laws by not having all of our things accessible? I mean, I got the sense that we are really behind, and we really have to like get on board legally, right?
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to mention kind of in response to what Erica was saying. It's like, if what you need is like some way to motivate people, I think the actual letter of the law for, especially for publicly funded institutions, is pretty explicit that organizations like Berkeley Lab need to have pretty comprehensive accessibility measures. It's a legal requirement, and there's actually been a huge uptick in lawsuits enforcing that. So I think when it comes to motivating lab leadership or anyone who's responsible for producing content, I think that's a great thing to have in your back pocket. It is very much a legal responsibility that I think we need to be on top of. And I think I've been encouraged to see that with John German and all the people who are heading up the kind of website redesign for Berkeley Lab, I think that accessibility has been brought up multiple times as like a main focus of that. So I think as we transition to a new website, I think that will be one thing that will continue to get better. But yeah, I think just having best practices and the stuff we do every day, whether they're presentations or emails or Zoom meetings, I think that all that stuff kind of falls to us right now. Karen, did you have anything?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to second Erica's suggestions. Wonderful presentation, Jeremy. I learned a few new things, which is awesome. And I really appreciated it. So well done. But a presentation like this to the LCC and the new VizCom group would be awesome. And there is definitely stuff in your presentation that people won't know because it's so rich. So I really enjoyed it. And to Janie's point, the lab is very far behind, almost to an embarrassing point. And at All Access, we realize that, and we are trying to move forward and bring attention to things, but in a non-confrontational, non-divisive way, because that really wouldn't do any good. But whether it's accessible publications, videos that contain closed captions. I could just go on. Websites that are inaccessible. I could go on and on and on. And yes, a bright and shining star is that our new lab website will have accessibility top of mind, which is awesome. But UC Berkeley, and I think that what is most frustrating for me as a person with a disability, as well as a member of All Access, is that all we need to do is look to our neighbor, UC Berkeley. And they are just pros. I mean, and granted, they have a funded disability office, but you know, you see a poster for an event at UC Berkeley, and at the bottom it says, you know, do you have any accessibility needs? Please get in touch with us right away. And they will have a person who will go with you to the event. Make sure you have a signer, or you can get your wheelchair in the room, stuff like that. So we have such a wonderful role model in UC Berkeley. And as you pointed out, they were at the very beginning of this whole movement and instrumental in the 70s in all of those changes in the law. And I went to a meeting of lawyers that I was at a couple of years ago, and they said lawsuits about accessibility are just skyrocketing because people are being called upon. So it would be wonderful if a lab could take this on. I agree, it's a heavy lift and it's hard to start. It's hard to find a starting point, but oftentimes the best starting point is right now. Thank you, Jeremy. Great presentation.
Of course. Yeah, thank you so much for chiming in. Janie, did you have something else, or is your
yeah. So Karen, that makes me think we need checklists to help us so that we can quickly decide what action needs to be taken of some kind. That would be really useful, whether it's for a document or a website, whatever, just so that we're doing that on a regular basis. I'm curious, where are other labs, and are there other labs that we could adopt some of their practices, or is everyone behind? Faith, might you know, or Jen?
I'm going to say when I look at policies around the laboratories, I'm not going to toot our own horn, but I feel like we are at least still behind in where we need to be, but still much more forward than some of the other laboratories. So I'd say, you know, from our standpoint, we are definitely trying to do this from an accessibility, you know, from a public K-12 standpoint of the more we can be accessible in the work that we do, the greater audience and population that we're able to engage. So that's why this is really important for our work that we do, and really happy that Jeremy has, you know, already started to look into this and to, you know, make sure that everything we do is accessible, especially in the digital space where we know a lot of people are engaging. And I think Kelly, I do want to reiterate that Kelly also has a, you know, resource that she shared for social media, as well as Kelly, I think you also mentioned that you would be covering some of this information as well. Not to put you on the spot.
You broke up. You said that I would be covering this for, say that one more time.
Or you had resources that people could check out, especially around social media.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm actually getting ready. I'm trying to getting into the site. It's a Site Improve accessibility course webinar that covers digital as well as social media. And I'm going to ask the task force to specifically, you know, pay close attention to the social media aspect if they have time to pay attention to everything else. But yeah, that will be coming, just working through the weeds on a couple of issues with actually accessing the accessibility course. So stay tuned.
Awesome.
Site Improve courses are great. I'm sorry, Janie, I didn't raise my hand. I'll just say this really quick. Those Site Improve courses are fantastic. We have also signed up at ETA and are very proactive about accessibility. But Site Improve has a huge learning curve, as IT warned me, and they are absolutely right. So just FYI on Site Improve.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to, I just put, you know, where are we with having accessibility issues on our strategic plans? I mean, if it's not on the plans, then it's not going to very easily get done.
I think that's probably not in our wheelhouse, but definitely questions, yeah, that needs to be asked those who are in charge of that work. Jen, you might have some more information on that one, if you do.
I don't actually, and I was just thinking, Karen, this is something maybe we could talk with the All Access group about. I know we've started to have some of these conversations, and this conversation has really sort of like energized me around some of the things that we could, bring to lab leadership, and, sort of continue the work that the All Access group has already done to keep raising awareness about this. It's really important. Jeremy, I just have to say again, this was a fantastic presentation. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. Really glad that you all came. It was great to have you.
And I think I do want to reiterate that anything, Karen, that we can do to support and probably amplify your efforts, because you all are focusing on this at all times. And this is a part of our work, but we want to make sure that we support those who, are part of the infrastructure that will be leading, the work being done, and however we can amplify and support. Open to doing that, as well as Janie, if we can pull it over to, IDEA, of course.
Yep.
So anyway, we can amplify both offices and the ERG as well.
Mhm.
Right. I think, Jeremy, you get to do closing words.
Amazing. Well, yeah, again, thank you to everyone who's already chimed in and asked questions. As I kind of said from the outset, I think I am very much still a student of this, so still learning and very much learning like what opportunities there are at the lab. But I think, as Karen mentioned, Janie mentioned, there's a lot to be done, and that is both exciting and frustrating, I think. But whether you are somebody who has skin in this game, or is somebody who are very much just coming to the table and learning about it for the first time, I think that everyone has a role to play in pushing these forward and just like normalizing it, just talking about it. And everyone has to learn somewhere. Like I've only started learning about this in the last year or two, so yeah, encourage everyone to go out and talk about it with your teams and your interns and whoever you have the opportunity to kind of teach in any way. So thank you all so much for coming, and hope to see you all at the next Community Connections lunch hour.